Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with Ask Dave. A viewer asks, do instruments matter? He wasn't meaning like in the general sense, like the existence of instruments. What he was talking about was the brand of instruments, the quality of instruments. Does it matter? Well, the short answer is yes, of course it matters. But as usual, there are nuances, and it's the nuances that have all the fun compacted inside them. So let's talk about a few of them, shall we? First of all, one of the ancillary questions to the big question was, what about like incredibly expensive violins, string instruments that cost a fortune? I mean, just a crazy fortune, that are owned by museums and countries and that are only lent to various artists. Do they matter? Yeah, they matter. Do they sound hugely better than a decent quality modern replica or new instrument? Well, that depends. It really depends. They matter not so much because the sound is inherently superior. They matter because, like we'd notice, I mean, sometimes you will, sometimes you won't. You're only going to notice, first of all, if it's like a violin or a cello, if a soloist is playing, and if a soloist is playing in a way that brings out the distinctive qualities of the particular instrument. And more than that, they matter to the extent they permit the soloist to do their best work. That's how they matter. You know, when you are comfortable with an instrument, I can even tell you that about a tam-tam, for heaven's sake. When you know you have a wonderful sounding instrument, it changes the way you play. Your playing becomes more sensitive. You're more attentive. You feel that you can do more. You can take risks. The confidence that a great instrument inspires in the performer is really where that aspect comes in, I think. Because if you've got a mediocre artist with a fabulous instrument, well, what difference does it make? You're right. It's not going to make any difference. It only matters at a very, very high level of execution between artists who know and understand and appreciate what they have and know how to make the most of it. Now, does that mean that having a $1 billion Stradivarius is going to guarantee a great performance? Of course not. Does it guarantee it's going to sound fabulous, especially if it isn't tuned all that precisely? Of course not. It's about potential. The potential is there. And like I said, it's really about the relationship of the artist to the instrument rather than the listener to the instrument. So that's how I feel about like really expensive string things. Let's talk about pianos. Oh yeah. The viewer asked, is there really a difference between a Steinway and a Bechstein? Yeah, there is. I'm telling you, there is. I can always tell a Bosendorfer, almost always anyway. First of all, they have some extra low notes at the bottom of the keyboard, often as not, but you can hear the difference between instruments. I mean, pianists are organists, particularly. I mean, come on. I mean, he admits that organs sound different from each other. That's very true. But pianists are at the mercy of their instruments. Harpsichordists are, people who play those kinds of instruments. And so the instrument matters tremendously. I mean, in any instrumental category where there's a genuine limitation to what the performer can do to alter the sound of their instrument, the basic sound of their instrument is hugely, hugely important. Now, once again, there are nuances. Some artists care more about the sound that they make than others. There are chord guys and line guys. But we know that artists had very strong preferences about the kinds of instruments they played. Glenn Gould, had his favorite Steinway that was, dry and very contrapuntally clear, like his playing. It aided the way he wanted to play. So yeah, the instrument mattered. Not everybody liked that sound. They didn't. It was very distinctive sound. but it was his sound, and he managed to find a piano that mirrored his sonic preferences. So yeah, the instrument really, really mattered. Some pianists carry their own keyboard action around with them. Christian Zimmerman is famous for that. He doesn't carry a piano. Some took a piano. I mean, Liszt, rode around Europe on horseback with a piano and a wagon following him. I mean, giving concerts in those days was quite something. But Zimmerman has supposedly a piano action that he inserts into whatever piano he happens to run into. Well, it has to be the action for the brand of piano. But he has his own very particular action because it has a certain kind of touch. And he plays best when that kind of touch is available to him. The piano itself may or may not sound all that different, from one place to another, but the way that it functions mechanically has a decided impact on the kind of music that he makes. Ivan Moravec, who's someone I knew personally quite well, he always worked very carefully with his piano tuner to make sure. He would test the piano, make sure that it had absolute evenness of modulation throughout its range, and he would point out notes that needed adjustment. And he also had his own little toolkit with him in case he had to make some last-minute changes himself. And he told me a story, a very interesting story, about how when he was at the, when he was giving a concert in New York, he would go to the Steinway studio and select a piano, and he would play the piano. He was very, very particular because he was incredibly into sound and sonority. Some artists are not. And there was a piano he particularly enjoyed playing, and he went away for a while. He came back for another concert sometime later, and he tried that piano, and he said all the beauty had just gone out of it. I don't know how true that was. I don't know exactly what he was talking about, but to his way of hearing, it really mattered. It really mattered to him, and it mattered to the way he played it. It mattered to his ability to evoke the kind of timbral effects that he wanted to get out of the instrument. So yes, the instrument mattered. Another case in point where you can really hear a difference, and I've mentioned this before, was Rostropovich. If you compare his recordings of the Dvorak Cello Concerto with the one with Karajan on Deutsche Grammophon, with the one with Ozawa on Erato, he was using a new cello that he really, really liked. In that second recording, it wasn't the second recording, it was the other recording, because he recorded that concerto like 5 times. He used a variety of cellos over the course of his lifetime, and that the Ozawa recording has a much more mellifluous and singing quality, I think, than the other cello had. And he plays quite similarly. I mean, he really does, but it's a gorgeous performance. It's just euphonious in a way that the first one doesn't match, however great a performance it may be. I also remember seeing, speaking of cellists, Peter Vispilve at the Allegro conference. Allegro was a music distributor, and they used to have a big shindig for all the classical music people at some, far off venue. This was, I think, in Albany, Albany, New York. And Peter Vispilve played Bach on a Baroque cello and Kodai, the Kodai solo cello sonata on a modern cello. And boy, was there a difference in sound, not just in the basic sound of the instrument itself, the fundamental sound of the instrument, but also, of course, in the way that it was played. More vibrato, less vibrato, all of that stuff comes into play. So it isn't just what kind of instrument, it's how you play the instrument and what sounds you expect the instrument to make and what instruments make those sounds most easily or most readily. And so we come to the gigantic elephant in the room, which is period instruments versus modern instruments. Well, obviously the instruments sound very differently, and obviously they're played very differently. And some may prefer one sound or another sound. Some sounds may be better for the particular music that those instruments play, and others might be better for more contemporary music. I happen to think that the notion that period instruments are better for music of the period is largely crap. My experience working a whole lifetime with musicians and people like that is that there is no music written for earlier instruments that you can't play just as well on modern instruments. Almost just as well. I mean, there may be certain quirks of technique that are more readily realizable on earlier instruments. There are, but in general, the best instrument is the one that makes it easier for the performer to play the music well. That's what we want. And most early instruments are enormously variable, let's just say. Not to suggest that they're downright defective, but they're enormously variable. And the modern copies of said instruments that most people play on these days are absolutely modern instruments. They are designed to eliminate all of those problems that the early instruments had. So, they may not have, you may have a violin, it may not have a chin rest, which may mean you have to do certain things play things in a certain manner. But the instrument itself is made to modern standards of technical finish and tonal accuracy. And thank God. One of the reasons that I've mentioned this before too, but it's very interesting because finally somebody studied it. Beverly Gerald actually wrote a very interesting essay about it. But one of the reasons that Beethoven and Mozart and Haydn often use only a single flute in their works is because no two flutes were tuned the same way. So if you wanted a pair of flutes, you basically had to get them hopefully from the same manufacturer, and hopefully that manufacturer manufactured flutes that were the same, were tuned similarly. It was very, very difficult to find pairs of instruments that actually had the same intonation in the same music, and the performers, of course, had to know how to blow them properly and how to adjust the intonation and twiddle their tubes and do all kinds of things to try and make sure that they matched tuning. That was a big issue, a huge issue back in the day. With today's modern replicas of Baroque instruments, it's not so much an issue. Not the issue it was anyway, because they can manufacture these things up to precision standards. So where does that leave us? Well, like I said, the answer to the question is instruments matter. Instruments matter a lot. But just as important as the instrument is the relationship between the performer and the instrument, what they allow the performer to do. And the best instrument always is the one that allows the musician to make music, fabulous music. And whatever does that matters hugely. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks for joining me. Take care.